Good morning and welcome back to the Shamrock Quilt Studio. I've got an update for you today on our Springburst project, and I'm really happy to tell you that we're making some great progress with that. Most of the borders are on, and I'm going to show you how I did that, how I came to that solution, how I put it on, how I measured the fabric, all of that right after this. Well, welcome back. Today we're talking about Springburst, and it's taken us a long time to get to this point with Springburst, and it has been a fun project but very challenging because it's one of those quilts that, because it's EPP and it's in that diamond shape, you've got a border of all of those really sharp points. Here's what I'm talking about. This is what the edge of that EPP project looks like. And somehow we've got to take this edge and get it to a solid border that we can quilt and finish this up with. And there's so many choices. I've been through a bunch of them trying to figure out how we can make it work. But let me show you what I've decided on. I think I'm going to put a picture up here of putting this quilt out. I just set it out on the floor and cut a piece of this white fabric and just kind of laid it out and played with it and to see what it was going to look like to try to come up with solution. Because I think I've mentioned it before that I thought at one time about making this round. I've thought about making it square. I thought about making it scalloped edge. So many choices have been in my head about what I was going to do with this, but ultimately I knew I needed to do something to bring all those points together and kind of even it up into a smooth border that we can work with. So what I did was I cut a piece of the fabric that matches this white fabric that is 4.5 inches wide. Now I picked that because let's just use this little ruler. We need something that comes up back behind this point here. This point right here. So it needs to come up in here somewhere. And it needs to extend long enough that we can sew these points down, have room for a seam allowance, and still have something that looks like a border. Now, the wider we make the border, the bigger the quilt is, and the more fabric it takes. And I don't know if you recall, but we had gotten to a point where we used all of the fabric that was purchased for this, making these triangles. And by the time we got to the point with the border, we had used that cut of fabric and we were moving on to using something that looked like it was similar. It had the same edging on the selvages. It came from the same store. It had the same SKU number on it. It just didn't come off that same bolt. And I'm fairly confident that it's the same, but we'll want to try to be very judicious in making what we do look like it was supposed to be that way, as opposed to happenstance. So I had enough of that original fabric to do 4 of these strips. Now I need 8 because this is an octagon. So I did 4 in the original fabric and 4 in the new fabric. And what I did was I put 2 of those strips on one side and 2 of the strips on the other side. And then with the new fabric, I'll do 2 strips and 2 strips. So that way, if they age differently, it will look like it was supposed to be done that, instead of just having half and half or willy-nilly, 3 over here and 1 over here. There looks like there was a method to our madness, correct? So now we've got that strip cut, and I'm going to show you here what that strip looks like. It's a 4.5 inch strip of fabric. And then we put a line on it at about 5/8 inch into or away from the cut edge. And I use my disappearing pen, water soluble, air soluble, however you want to look at it. That line there, and that line we placed right at this point here. So that was our line to show us what was going to be exposed below it and what was going to be hidden above it. Now I want to show you, and let me see. Okay, I think we've got this lined up. Now I want to show you how I'm sewing these down, and more importantly, how I get the points of those diamonds to get up underneath the point and not show. And right now, we're going to be looking at this diamond right here. This side is sewn down, this tab is out, or our tail, and this edge is not sewn down. The paper is still in here, and I found that you could do this two ways. You could do it the way I did, where the paper was still in and it gives you that structure and it will hold it very straight, or you can press it, take the paper out, and either pin it or glue it in place. I prefer keeping the paper in. I did have some where the paper came out, and I was just able to work it the way you normally would work it, just pinning it in place. You could also glue it in place if you wanted to work that way. All right, so our goal now is we need to get this tail tucked in underneath this piece. And some of them I trimmed them before I started working on them, but I found that really didn't benefit me much. But what we want to do is we want to try to get these raw edges as far in here as we can, and if anything comes close to the edge, it is a folded edge. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to take this top layer and start kind of folding it in. And sometimes that works best with a pointer or a pair of pointy scissors, and sometimes you can use the edge of a larger pen to push that in. Now you see what's happened already. We've gotten that in. We've got a raw edge here, and we've got a raw edge underneath it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come into this raw edge underneath and start pushing that in. And you can use that pointy edge of your pen to grab a hold of that fabric. See, I'm turning it under. That would be like needle turn applique that you're doing there. Okay, so now we've got it up underneath it, but it's a little bulky. And what's here showing is all folded pieces. So we're just going to come in here and give it a little bit of force. I'm going to make sure the raw edges don't come out. And we're going to tuck it in. And you want to try to get it as smooth as you can. It's going to be bulky, but that's okay. Now my thread is knotted, and I'm going to come up underneath. There we go. And then we're going to grab just this top layer of fabric right on the fold, a little stitch. We're going to pull it snug, and we're going to come back down almost where we started. And we're going to take an itsy bitsy little stitch and then come back up and grab that top layer, that fold. And we're going to pull it very snug. That pulls it down. Check to make sure our tail is underneath still. We're going to grab another nip of fabric up through that top layer. Now we might want to grab just a little bit more of that top layer this time. So we've got 3 stitches in there in what is probably 3/8 of an inch, not quite half an inch. So that's going to hold that nice and firm. And all the time before we stitch, we're going to push it in. And we're going to take our stitches right at the edge of that. And then we're just going to stitch right up. And if you keep that stitch coming out right on that fold, it will be nearly invisible. Okay, and as we come to the inner point here, we're going to take an extra stitch right at the top to grab it right there on that point. And you could choose to take a stitch back to the back. I think that's through the paper. Let me do that again. You want to try to grab the fabric and as little of the paper as you can. That will help you get the papers out and also preserve it. And then I'm going to put a little knot right here at the top. That'll do two things. That'll help secure it and keep it nice and snug. And also, if the thread should break along the way, it will keep from all of it raveling out. Now, here we're working with the same problem, just in a reverse. And we're just going to tuck that tail up in there. And any strings that want to come along with it. And then we're going to grab it. We're going to stick that needle back up and we're going to grab just the very tip of that area right there on this diamond. So now we've started in a different direction and I like to twist it around. And we're going to stitch down this way. And you see how that kind of bubbles up under there? That's just from handling it. Just keep it straight. And I find this is the easiest of all the stitching because it's a comfortable direction for me. It goes faster. And not to worry, we're not going to do all these points right now. I just want to show you what we do when we get to the end. And there are two problems with using pins. One is that they catch your thread. The other thing is they will scratch you. Sometimes they stab you, but more often than not, they're going to scratch you as you're trying to manipulate that fabric and you get the edge of that film. Pin, excuse me. So be careful with that. Okay, we're coming up to the end. We're just going to keep sewing. And you're just walking that tightrope of getting enough fabric but not too much. And when we take our last stitch and we come up right in the point, we're going to go back down. I try to grab the littlest bit of that tail as I can when I go down. You want to keep it really, really close to the point. The closer you are, the finer your point will be. And on the back side, well, you probably guessed it, we're going to put a knot. So we're stitching in there a little bit. I'm going to put a knot, and then we're ready to go back the other end, the other side, just like we did before. Now, let me show you also while we're here about this corner. So let's go back in and kind of check it. If you wanted to press it, that would probably be a good idea. And I wanted to kind of check my angle. Let me get a longer ruler. It looks like we're pretty good shape. It certainly does not have to be perfect. You just want it pretty close. And I do like to put 2 or 3 pins here, just so that I know it's gonna stay straight. Okay, and then this one we're gonna turn it in the other direction just so we can get in there and sew. Now let me thread another needle, or I tell you what, we'll knot this one and just use this one. Okay, that should do that, and then we can use this one. And I do like to tuck the tails of my thread into and underneath that back layer so that they're not loose in the quilt until we can get it sandwiched. Okay, so we've got another length of thread. I'll put that right there until we get ready for it. Now we're going to sew this piece here. And I think if I can grab a hold of this pin right here, we're going to swap this one out, because this one's a little bit long. It's going to get in the way. And we're going to orientate this. We're going to orient this so that it's in the right direction for us. Let's make sure we've got this on camera. There we go. And I'm going to adjust my light so I can see a little better and so you can see a little better. But what we're going to do is we're going to start sewing right here at the point. So we're going to come in, flip that fabric so you can get right into that point. Okay, so there it is coming up right there. That's a great location for it. So we're only going to focus on this first little bit. And what I like to try to do is make sure that these 2 pieces of these diamonds are secure first. So a little stitch to kind of hold them together. And that's going to have a knot. And that way too, if we have to pull on this for some reason, we're not pulling them away. And now you can see that that is really right there in the crevice. And then we're just going to sew that same kind of applique stitch right down this line. And your length of stitch is really up to you. I like something that's maybe 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch because you want it to stay flat. People are used to machine stitch to join pieces. So a smaller stitch is going to be more or less what they're expecting. It will hold together more like a machine stitch. And it allows you to pull it pretty close and snug. And you can see how quickly that goes together. Now let me tell you something, and this may be a very unpopular opinion with people who quilt. I see a lot of comments out there on social media about, I sew, I don't want to hem your pants or do repairs on your stuff. But the reality is that sometimes we have to do those kinds of repairs and we have to hem pants, and there may not be someone around that can do it for us, or someone we can pay to do it. And I know probably for a lot of folks that would be your chosen way to do that, and that's fine. But in the situation where you have to do it, this stitch that we're using right here is your best friend for some kind of hemming, or even putting in any kind of repair to a garment or a household item. This is probably what you're going to use because you're not going to want your stitches to show. If you're talking about a decorative stitch, that's something altogether different. We are almost there. And these have been pretty small stitches. Now we're about 3/4 of the way out. And let me tell you something that I did, because I'm not sure if I'm going to need to trim these corners. Some areas I may. So about 3/4 of the way out, I'm going to put a little stitch in through that top layer and come to the back and put a knot. And then I'll continue stitching along the way. And the reason I did that is because if I do have to come in and trim, I'll still have a place there where that thread is not going to completely come out of that seam. And then we're just going to pick up from there to the edge and knot it at the edge. We're almost there. We're about 1/8 of an inch from the end, and this is where I'm going to knot it. And to knot it again, I'm going to come down right on the top, go to the back, and I'm going to put in a knot right on that seam line. I'm going to run it down just a little bit, and then I'm going to knot it right there. Now, because we sewed this the way we did, we can go in and open that seam or press it to one side, whichever we want to do. And then I'm just going to run 1/2 inch or so of thread in the seam and trim it. And there we go. There's the seam right there. That's the corner. And you really can't tell it that it's a hand stitch seam. You cannot see those unless you pull it open. And there it is on the back side. I hope you can see that as clearly as I can. That was my goal for that. Now, the great news is the border is all around this quilt except for these 2 points, which I need to sew. I don't want to have you sit through that. But now we have this particular quilt top finished so that we've got a solid edge. So now we've got this quilt top finished so that we have a solid edge. And from here we can move on to sandwiching. Now, this is a white quilt. This is primarily white, and I want a white batting in it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take advantage of this being a kind of smaller quilt. I really don't even know. I don't even know how long it is. Let's see. One radius of this is about 28.5 inches. So that's 56, 57 inches from its widest point all the way across. I'm going to try to take some of my batting scraps. You know, when you work on a quilt, there's usually a section of that batting, especially if you buy a pre-cut batting, that you don't use. And because I generally use the same batting over and over again, I'm going to try to take some of the bigger scraps and put together a piece of batting for this. I think that will work fine in this particular application. And then I'm going to sandwich this, excuse me, and the backing for this is going to be this floral fabric. I think that will be really cute. And then I need to look at what I have as far as the pinks and the greens fabrics to see which one I have an adequate supply of to make the binding, because we have 8 sides here. We're probably going to have a little more binding than usual because of that. But that's the way this is looking. You got a big old lump of stuff underneath there, but I give you a good idea of how this looks. It's very unusual. It's the first time doing a quilt for me that's not either square or rectangular in some size or shape. It is an octagon, and it's kind of an odd shape. Now, the question is going to be, what are we going to do with it when we get it together? And I don't really know. I know it will fit nicely over the top of my ottoman. It will do great to sit on the back of a sofa or the back of a chair. So we're just going to kind of see how it plays out. It can be hung, but it's going to require some kind of special hanging device if we hang it, because even if we tack it through the quilt to the wall at the points, it's still going to want to sink between those 2 points. So we may have to look at some options of how that's going to work. So just bear with me, let's get it together, and then we'll decide how we're going to address that later. Oh, there it is. It's not a real splashy quilt, but I think it's very interesting the way it's made, and it really looks pretty when you look at the whole thing from a grand scale versus looking at it individually. It's been fun to make. I love to do EPP. So I'm moving forward from here. I probably will be able to sandwich this in the next day or two. I plan to finish these extra places up, check my corners, give it a good press, because most of the stitching lines on this are on the bias, and even the way this is designed with this 8-pointed star in the middle, that stretching is its own worst enemy. I'll put it that way, because it wants to stretch in all directions because of the bias lines, the bias seams, the bias cutting. And we'll just have to work with that the best we can. I think the best thing is going to be to press it and starch it, and then be able to lay it down and do that pen basting on it so we can move forward with it. We've covered just about everything I wanted to on this. I appreciate you being with me. This project has taken a long time, and I appreciate your patience with that, and hope that we can kind of wrap it up here within the next little bit. If you like the content today, please give us a thumbs up. Be sure to share with your friends and subscribe. And if you're interested in seeing content early, become a member here at the channel. We appreciate our members greatly. They support our channel and encourage us to continue quilting and making beautiful things. Again, thank you, and we'll see you next week at the Shamrock Quilt Studio. Bye.